Victor has been looking for a male child for years. He keeps on impregnating different women while looking for a male child, but to no avail. Victor wiped the sweat off his forehead as he stood behind the counter of his small motor spare parts shop. Business had been slow for weeks, and the weight of his struggles pressed heavily on him. At just 25, he had imagined a brighter future, but his dreams seemed to slip further away with each passing day. When Ada walked into his life, it felt like a ray of hope. She was 23, cheerful, and hardworking, running a modest salon where she braided women's hair. Victor admired her determination, and soon they were married. Life seemed promising at first, but it wasn't long before Victor's frustration with his stagnant business began to show. Within 8 years of their marriage, Ada gave birth to 4 daughters. Each time the midwife or nurse announced, "It's a girl," Victor's heart sank. His disappointment grew with every child, morphing into resentment. He blamed Ada, convincing himself that she had failed him by not bearing a son to carry on his name. The house, once filled with laughter, became a place of tension and despair. Victor's anger was no longer hidden. It erupted in harsh words and punishments. Ada endured his bitterness in silence, hoping he would change. She poured her energy into her daughters, shielding them as best she could from their father's wrath. One fateful evening, Victor returned home in a foul mood. He stormed into the house, ignoring Ada's greeting. His eldest daughter, Neka, spilled a bowl of water while trying to clean the living room. Victor's shout echoed through the small house as he grabbed a cane and lashed out at her. Ada rushed to intervene, her voice trembling with fear. "Victor, she's just a child. Please stop." "Shut up," Victor roared. "If you had given me a son, I wouldn't have to deal with these useless girls." That night, Ada wept quietly as her daughters huddled close to her. She knew something had to change. Victor's anger was becoming unbearable, and the girls were suffering because of it. A few weeks later, Victor made his decision. "Pack your things and leave," he told Ada coldly. "I don't want to see your face in this house anymore. But the girls stay with me." Ada's heart shattered. "Victor, they're just children. They need their mother." "I don't care," Victor said. "Get out." With tears streaming down her face, Ada packed her belongings and left the house. Her daughters clung to her, begging her not to go, but she had no choice. Victor's mind was made up. As Ada walked away from the home she had built, she vowed to find a way to protect her daughters. Little did she know that her departure would set off a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Ada wiped her tears as she stepped into the dusty road, clutching the small bag that held her few belongings. The cries of her daughters echoed in her ears, piercing her heart like a dagger. But she had no power to fight Victor's stubbornness. She whispered a silent prayer, promising to find a way to rescue her children. She walked aimlessly, unsure of where to go, until she remembered someone, Jude. He was a successful businessman who had admired her from a distance, even before she married Victor. He was kind and patient, and although she never encouraged his advances, she always respected him. When Jude heard about Ada's situation, he wasted no time coming to her aid. "Ada, you deserve better than this," he said as he handed her a glass of water in his spacious living room. "Stay here until you decide your next steps. My home is open to you." Over the next few months, Jude became a pillar of support for Ada. He helped her rebuild her confidence, encouraging her to revive her hair braiding business. Ada was hesitant at first, but eventually took the leap. Her salon flourished with Jude's backing, and for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of happiness. During this time, Jude proposed to her. "Ada," he said softly one evening, "you are an incredible woman. I know you've been through so much, but I promise to treat you and your children with love and respect. Please let me take care of you." Ada hesitated, torn between her past and the future Jude offered. But Victor's coldness and cruelty were still fresh in her mind, and Jude's warmth felt like a lifeline. She agreed to marry him, and their union brought her a sense of stability she had never known. Jude showered Ada with kindness and generosity, making her feel cherished. Every month, she visited her daughters at Victor's house, bearing gifts. But each visit broke her heart. The girls were pale and thin, their once bright eyes clouded with sadness. Victor's jealousy festered with every visit. Seeing Ada well-dressed and happy, while his own business struggled, filled him with bitterness. He lashed out at the children, blaming them for his failures. One afternoon, during a visit, Ada noticed bruises on Neka's arms. Her eyes widened with horror. "Neka, who did this to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Neka hesitated, but her sisters spoke up. "Papa beat her," they said in unison. Ada's fury erupted like a storm. She confronted Victor, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you lay your hands on my child? You have no right. They're my children, not yours." Victor shouted back. Ada clenched her fists. "If you think I will let you destroy their lives, you're mistaken. They're leaving with me today." Victor laughed mockingly. "You think you can just take them? Over my dead body." But Ada was determined. With Jude's help, she filed for custody of the children. Victor's weak financial state worked against him, and the girls were finally reunited with their mother. As Ada watched her daughters settle into their new home, she felt a weight lift from her chest. Yet deep down, she knew Victor's anger wouldn't fade easily, and his obsession with having a male child would only grow stronger. Victor sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty room that once echoed with his daughter's laughter. The house felt eerily silent now. His rage simmered beneath the surface, fueled by his belief that Ada had humiliated him. But more than the loneliness, what gnawed at him was the absence of a male child to carry on his name. His spare parts business was crumbling, and without Ada's steady hand and the children's vibrant energy, the house felt lifeless. One evening, after downing his usual bottle of cheap gin, Victor made a decision. He would remarry, but this time, he would ensure his new wife bore him a son. It wasn't long before he found Hannah, a young and gentle woman from a neighboring village. She was everything Victor believed he needed, obedient and eager to please. He married her quickly, despite protests from his relatives who questioned his haste. Hannah moved into Victor's home and tried her best to create a happy environment. Within a year, she gave birth to a baby girl. Victor's initial disappointment was masked by hope. "It's only the first one," he muttered to himself. "A son will come next." But the following years brought 2 more daughters. By the time the third girl arrived, Victor's frustration boiled over. He began to avoid Hannah, barely speaking to her unless it was to express his disappointment. In fact, it got bad that he refused to have sex with Hannah, because he did not want her to give birth to female children. Hannah endured his coldness for years, clinging to the hope that he would change. But when Victor started coming home late, reeking of alcohol and perfume, she knew her marriage was crumbling. Victor had taken to having sex with younger women in town, desperate for a chance to father a son. He would promise them money and gifts, convincing them to have his child. But each time he discovered the baby was a girl, his anger grew more unhinged. He will ask the mother to get rid of the baby. The rumors of his actions began to spread. Whispers of babies mysteriously disappearing after being born. Hannah confronted him one evening, her voice trembling. "Victor, what have you become? Do you think this will bring you happiness?" Victor laughed bitterly. "Happiness? What happiness is there in a house full of women? You failed me, Hannah. Don't preach to me about what I deserve." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're destroying yourself, Victor. And you're destroying the lives of innocent children." "I don't care," Victor snapped. "I'll keep trying till I get my son." Hannah couldn't take it any longer. After 2 years of enduring his neglect and infidelity, she packed her things and left, taking their daughters with her. Victor barely noticed her departure. After Hannah had gone, Victor kept up with his life of having an affair with ladies and asking them to kill their babies because it keeps turning out to be female. Years later, Victor met a very beautiful young lady in Nkechi. She was 22 years old. Victor had fallen deeply for Nkechi. Victor lavished attention on the young woman. Her beauty and lively spirit reminded him of a time when life felt full of promise. He spared no expense, buying her the finest clothes, jewelry, and even paying for her family's rent. Nkechi basked in his generosity, though she occasionally hesitated about his age and temper. Months passed, and Nkechi's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Victor was thrilled, convinced the child she carried would finally be the son he had longed for. He often boasted to his friends in the market, "This time, I'll have an heir, someone to carry my name and take over my business." Nkechi, however, began to notice strange patterns in Victor's behavior. He grew overly controlling, questioning her every move and demanding to know where she went and who she spoke with. His obsession with the unborn child was unnerving. One day, Nkechi decided it was time for Victor to meet her family. Her parents had been curious about the man who was providing so generously but had yet to introduce himself properly. After weeks of convincing, Victor reluctantly agreed to visit. The day of the visit was bright and sunny. Victor dressed in his finest attire, eager to impress. As they approached Nkechi's family home, Victor felt a twinge of unease, but he dismissed it as nerves. When they arrived, Nkechi's mother, a woman in her late 50s, greeted them warmly. She led them into the sitting room, where a woman sat. The moment Victor stepped into the room, he froze. His heart began to race as he stared at the younger woman. It was Ada, his first wives, who gave birth to 4 girls. Ada looked up, her smile fading as recognition hit her. The room fell silent. Nkechi, unaware of the tension, introduced Victor proudly. "Mama, this is Victor, my fiancé and the father of my unborn child." Victor's mind raced, trying to process the nightmare unfolding before him. Nkechi was his daughter, his youngest child, who had been just 3 years old when Ada left with the girls. Time and distance had separated them so completely that neither father nor daughter had recognized each other. Ada stood slowly, her face pale. "Victor," she whispered, her voice trembling. Victor couldn't speak. He felt the weight of his sins crashing down on him. His past had caught up with him in the most horrifying way. Nkechi, confused by the tension, looked between her mother and Victor. "Mama, do you know him?" Ada's voice was cold now. "Yes, Nkechi. He's your father." The room erupted into chaos. Nkechi screamed, backing away from Victor, clutching her stomach as if to shield her unborn child from the truth. Ada's husband, who had been in the backyard, rushed in to find his wife sobbing and Nkechi shaking uncontrollably. Victor tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The gravity of his actions, his obsession, and the pain he had caused finally hit him. He stumbled out of the house, the weight of shame bearing down on him. As he walked aimlessly through the streets, Victor realized there was no escaping the monster he had become. His pursuit of a son had destroyed everything: his family, his humanity, and now his dignity. But the fact still remained that he loved Nkechi. Victor wandered aimlessly through the streets, his mind clouded with confusion and regret. The revelation at Nkechi's family home replayed in his head like a haunting drumbeat. The very child he had once cradled in his arms, the baby girl he had dismissed as insignificant in his obsession for a son, was now the mother of the unborn child he had celebrated. How could he have fallen so far? He had spent years chasing his misguided desires, blinded to the destruction he left in his wake. Now, the weight of his sins felt unbearable, pressing down on him with every step. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ada was trying to console Nkechi, but the young woman was inconsolable. She sat on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands trembling as she held her belly. "Mama, how could this happen? How didn't I know?" she cried. Ada's heart ached for her daughter. "Nkechi, you were too young to remember him. And after we left, I tried my best to shield you and your sisters from the pain he caused us. I never thought our paths would cross again, and certainly not like this." Her husband, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke. "This is a terrible situation, but we must focus on protecting Nkechi and the baby. Victor is dangerous, Ada. His actions have already destroyed so much. We cannot let him ruin Nkechi's life any further." Nkechi lifted her tear-streaked face. "Mama, I can't bear this. I can't bring this child into the world knowing who the father is." Ada knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her daughter. "Listen to me, Nkechi. You are not to blame for this. None of this is your fault. This child is innocent, just as you were when Victor wronged us. We'll figure this out together, I promise." As night fell, Victor found himself standing in front of his old home, the house he had shared with Ada and their daughters. The building was worn and empty, much like his soul. He leaned against the gate, the memories flooding back. The laughter of his little girls, the way Ada would braid their hair in the evenings, the warmth of a family he had thrown away. All of it seemed like a distant dream now. For the first time in years, Victor felt tears streaming down his face. He wept openly, the sound of his anguish filling the quiet street. He wasn't crying for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. He was crying for the man he used to be, the man he could have been if he hadn't let his greed and bitterness consume him. Inside the house, Nkechi lay awake, her thoughts racing. She couldn't escape the reality of her situation. The man she had trusted, the man she had thought would be her future, was actually the monster of her past. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, Nkechi made a decision. She wouldn't let Victor's sins define her or her child's life. She would face the future with strength, just as her mother had when she walked away from him years ago. Victor, on the other hand, was left to wrestle with his demons alone. His once desperate quest for a son had finally destroyed him, leaving him with nothing but the echoes of his mistakes. Victor spent days wandering the streets like a man lost in a storm. He couldn't return to Nkechi, not after what had been revealed. The very thought of her face, contorted in shock and disgust, cut deeper than any wound. He couldn't face Ada either. The woman he had wronged, the mother of the children he had abused, now stood as the protector of the family he had once destroyed. Meanwhile, back at Ada's home, life was far from calm. Nkechi avoided everyone, locking herself in her room. Her sisters tried to comfort her, but their efforts were met with silence. Ada was growing increasingly worried. She knocked softly on the door one evening. "Nkechi, my daughter, please eat something," Ada pleaded. "You're carrying a child. You need to be strong." Nkechi's voice came through the door, hoarse from crying. "Mama, I don't want this child. I can't bear the thought of what it means. How can I live with this shame?"